My parents threw me out at 18, leaving me to survive on nothing while they lived in luxury. They thought they'd finally get their hands on my grandfather's millions when he passed, but they didn't know he had left a secret instruction that would ruin them. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The call came on a Tuesday night, cutting through the rhythmic, rasping sound of sandpaper against old oak. I was in my workshop, a converted garage that smelled permanently of sawdust, varnish, and sweat. It was late, past 11, but I couldn't sleep. I rarely could when the bills were due. I was currently hunched over a Victorian vanity that had seen better days, trying to gently coax the water stains out of the grain without destroying the patina. My hands were dry, my knuckles scraped and stained with walnut dye, and my back ached with a dull, familiar throb. When my phone buzzed on the workbench, vibrating against a tin of nails, I nearly ignored it. Nobody called me this late unless it was a creditor or an emergency. I wiped my hands on my apron, leaving a streak of dust across the denim, and picked it up. The screen displayed a name I hadn't seen in months, but one that instantly commanded respect and a strange sense of dread. Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson was my grandfather's attorney. He was a man of few words, strict schedules, and absolute precision. He did not make social calls. He certainly didn't make late-night calls. My thumb hovered over the green butt. My heart, usually steady, began to hammer against my ribs. I knew. Before I even answered, I knew. "Hello," my voice cracked, raspy from hours of silence and wood dust. "Aaron," Mr. Henderson's voice was grave, stripped of its usual professional detachment. It was heavy. I am so sorry to be the one to tell you this. It's Henry." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The smell of the wood, the hum of the refrigerator in the corner, the distant sound of traffic, it all vanished. "Is he?" I couldn't finish the sentence. I couldn't say the word. "He passed away an hour ago, Aaron," Mr. Henderson said gently. "It was his heart. It was quick. He didn't suffer." I didn't cry immediately. It was too big of a shock for tears. Instead, my legs simply gave out. I slid down the side of the workbench until I hit the cold concrete floor, my phone pressed tight against my ear as if holding it closer would somehow keep Henry alive. Henry, my grandfather, was the only person in my bloodline who had ever looked at me and seen a human being. He was the only one who hadn't looked at me as an investment, an accessory, or a burden. When my parents, Cameron and Diane, had severed ties with me a decade ago, Henry was the one who had tried to maintain a bridge, even when I was too proud to walk across it. He was the anchor. And now, the anchor was gone. "Aaron, are you there?" "I'm here," I whispered, staring at a knot in the wood of the vanity. "I'm here." "I know this is not the time to discuss business," Mr. Henderson continued, his voice regaining some of its steeliness. "But Henry left specific instructions. He wanted me to contact you immediately, before anyone else." "Before my parents?" I asked, the bitterness rising up my throat, mingling with the grief. "Yes, before Cameron and Diane," Mr. Henderson confirmed. "The funeral arrangements are already pre-planned, per Henry's wishes, but the reading of the will, that is where things will be complicated. You need to be ready, Aaron. They are going to come for you." I closed my eyes, picturing Cameron's sneer and Diane's cold, appraising stare. I had spent 10 years building a fortress around my life to keep them out. "Let them come," I said, my voice trembling not with fear, but with a sudden, overwhelming exhaustion. "I don't care about the money, Mr. Henderson. I just lost my grandfather." "I know," he replied softly, "but they care about the money, and that makes them dangerous." I hung up the phone and sat there in the dark, surrounded by broken things I was trying to fix, realizing that the one thing that had remained whole in my life had just been shattered. The betrayal of his death felt worse than the diagnosis itself. It felt like the universe had finally decided I was strong enough to stand entirely alone. The next 3 days were a blur of gray skies and hollow chest pains. Grief is a physical thing. It's a weight that sits on your lungs and makes every breath a conscious effort. I didn't open the workshop. I didn't answer emails from clients asking about their chairs or their tables. I just sat in my small apartment, drinking lukewarm tea and staring at the only photo I had of Henry and me. It was taken when I was 7. We were fishing. I was holding a tiny, wriggling purr. CH looking terrified, and Henry was laughing, a big, booming laugh that made his eyes crinkle. He looked so alive in that photo. My phone became a war zone. At first, it was just Mr. Henderson coordinating the logistics of the funeral. But then, inevitably, the other messages started. Blocked number, unknown caller. I knew who it was. I hadn't spoken to Cameron or Diane in 11 years. Not since the day they packed my bags and told me that if I wasn't going to follow their career roadmap, which involved marrying a son of their business partner and getting a degree in something useful like corporate law, I was no longer welcome in their house. Finally, a text came through that bypassed the blocks, likely from a burner phone or a new business line. Diane, Aaron, we heard about your grandfather. Pick up the phone. We need to present a united front for the press and the board. Stop being childish. Childish, I said aloud to the empty room, reading the screen. My mother's favorite word for anything that involved human emotion or independence. I didn't reply. 2 hours later, another text, this one from Cameron. Cameron, this affects the family trust. We are coming to town. We'll meet you at the lawyer's office after the service. Don't embarrass us, Aaron. We're willing to help you manage your grief, but you need to be cooperative. Manage my grief? I scoffed, throwing the phone onto the couch. To them, grief was just another asset to be managed, another liability to be minimized. They didn't care that Henry was dead. They cared about the vacuum of power he had left behind. Henry had been the titan of the family, the one who built the wealth they so desperately tried to emulate. Without him, they were just two social climbers with expensive tastes and a dwindling allowance. I finally decided to answer the phone when Mr. Henderson called again on the eve of the funeral. They're in town, Mr. Henderson said. They've checked into the Four Seasons. They've already called my office 6 times demanding to see the will draft. Did you show them? I asked, pacing the length of my small living room. Of course not, Mr. Henderson said, sounding offended. Henry's instructions were explicit. The will is sealed until the formal reading. But Aaron, you need to prepare yourself. They are under the impression that Henry died without updating his estate plan since you were a teenager. They believe the old draft, the one from before you were kicked out, is still valid. I stopped pacing, the one where everything is split 3 ways. Correct, Mr. Henderson said. They believe they are walking away with 2/3 of the empire, and that they will likely be named trustees of your third because they still view you as incompetent. A cold chill ran down my spine. They didn't just want the money, they wanted control. They wanted to be my parents again, not out of love, but because owning me meant owning my share. Let them think what they want, I said, my voice hardening. I'll see them at the funeral. Aaron, Mr. Henderson warned. They are going to be aggressive. They will try to corner you. They will try to get you to sign documents, waivers, representation agreements before the reading. Do not sign anything. I won't, I promised. I looked back at the photo of Henry. I remembered the last time I saw him, about 6 months ago. We had met at a diner 3 towns over so my parents wouldn't catch wind of it. He had looked frail then, his hands shaking as he held his coffee cup. He had looked at me with such intensity, his blue eyes watery but sharp. They think I'm blind, Aaron, he had told me then. Cameron and Diane, they think just because I'm old I don't see how they treat people, how they treated you. It's okay, Grandpa, I had said, trying to soothe him. I'm fine, I made a life. You did, he'd smiled. A good life, an honest life, and I'm going to make sure nobody ever takes that away from you. I touched the glass of the photo frame. My parents were coming with their lawyers and their shark-like smiles, thinking they were about to carve up the carcass of a great man's legacy. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. Henry never did anything without a plan, and he held grudges longer than anyone I knew. The day of the funeral was overcast, the kind of gray that makes the greens of the cemetery look unnaturally bright. I arrived early, wanting a moment alone with the casket before the circus arrived. I was wearing a simple black dress I'd bought at a thrift store and tailored myself. It fit perfectly, but I knew it wouldn't pass the Diane inspection. It wasn't silk. It didn't have a designer label stitched into the hem. I stood by the open grave, the scent of damp earth filling the air. "I'm going to miss you, old man," I whispered. "I hope you're catching the big ones up there." The piece lasted exactly 10 minutes. A sleek, black limousine pulled up the grave. L Drive, crunching loudly, disturbing the silence. It was followed by a second car, a luxury SUV. My stomach tightened into a knot of anxiety and rage. The doors opened, and out they stepped. Diane was first. She looked less like a grieving daughter and more like she was attending a gala for widows. She wore a hat with a veil, oversized sunglasses, and a black coat that probably cost more than my entire year's rent. Her posture was rigid, practiced. Cameron followed. He had gained weight since I last saw him, his face puffy and red, likely from the scotch he drank like water. He wore a suit that screamed power, struggling to button the jacket over his midsection. They didn't come alone. They were flanked by 2 men in gray suits, assistants, junior lawyers. It didn't matter. It was a show of force. I didn't move. I stood my ground near the grave, my hands clasped in front of me. Diane saw me. She stopped, removing her sunglasses slowly. Her eyes swept over me, starting at my boots, scuffed leather, and ending at my hair, tied back in a simple bun. Her lip curled just a fraction. "Aaron," she said, her voice wasn't warm, it was flat. "You came." "It's my grandfather's funeral," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Of course I came." Cameron walked up beside her, checking his watch as if he had a meeting to get to. "Well," he grunted, looking at me with a mix of disdain and annoyance. "You look tired. Are you eating? You look like a skeleton." "I'm fine, Cameron," I said. I couldn't bring myself to call him Dad. "It's father to you," he snapped, then smoothed his tie. "Look, let's not make a scene today. There are important people coming, business associates of Henry's. We need to look like a family." "We haven't been a family in 11 years, I reminded him. "Don't start," Diane hissed, stepping closer. The smell of her perfume, heavy, floral, expensive, was suffocating. "We are doing you a favor by even acknowledging you here. We could have had security keep you at the gate." "Henry would have loved that," I said dryly, banning his favorite air from his funeral. Diane laughed, a sharp barking sound. "Favorite air? Oh, Aaron, you always did have an active imagination. Henry was a traditionalist. He valued success. Legacy, not," she gestured vaguely at me, "manual labor." "We're here to help you, actually," Cameron interjected, his tone shifting to a fake, oily benevolence. "We know you're overwhelmed. You're not used to this world. When the will is read, there's going to be a lot of legal jargon, complicated tax structures." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. "We have our legal team handling the transition," Cameron said, holding the paper out to me. "This is just a standard representation agreement. It authorizes our lawyers to handle your portion of the administrative duties. It saves you the legal fees. You won't have to pay a dime." I looked at the paper. It was thick, creamy stationery. "You want me to sign this, now, at the graveside?" I asked, incredulous. "It's just administrative, Aaron," Diane said, checking her reflection in her sunglasses. "Don't be difficult. We're trying to protect you. You don't know how to handle money. You'll just lose it or get scammed. We'll put your share in a trust, give you a monthly stipend. It's for your own good." The audacity was breathtaking. They hadn't even buried the man yet, and they were already trying to legally shackle me. "I have my own lawyer," I said, stepping back. Cameron's eyes narrowed. "Who? That mall lawyer you used for your traffic tickets?" "Mr. Henderson," I said. The silence that followed was delicious. Cameron's face went from red to purple. Diane froze. "Henderson," Cameron sputtered. "Henderson is the estate attorney. He can't represent you. That's a conflict of interest." "He's not representing me," I clarified. "He's executing Henry's wishes, and he advised me not to sign anything from you." Diane glared at me, the mask of the grieving daughter slipping completely to reveal the predator underneath. "You ungrateful little brat. We are trying to ensure the estate stays intact. You think you deserve a seat at the table? You walked away." "You kicked me out," I corrected her, my voice rising slightly. "You threw my clothes on the lawn because I wanted to build furniture instead of merge corporations." "And look where it got you," Cameron sneered, gesturing to my hands. "Look at your hands, they're rough, disgusting. You're a laborer, Aaron, you're not one of us." "Thank God for that," I said. Before they could respond, the other cars began to arrive. Mr. Henderson's vintage sedan pulled up, and the dynamic instantly changed. Cameron and Diane immediately pasted their mournful expressions back on. Diane dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Cameron bowed his head solemnly. They were actors, performing for an audience of peers, but as they turned to walk toward the seating area, Cameron leaned in close to my ear, his breath smelling of mints and rot. "Play your games, Aaron," he whispered. "But when that will is read, you'll see, Henry knew what was best for the family money, and he knew it wasn't you." He walked away, taking his place in the front row. I stood there, shaking, watching the parents who had abandoned me pretend to mourn the father whose heart they had broken 1,000 times. They thought they were the main characters of this story. They thought they were the powerful ones. But as I looked at Mr. Henderson, who gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod from across the grave, I knew the storm was just beginning. The funeral reception was a master class in hypocrisy, but I didn't stay long. I had seen enough. As I drove my battered pickup truck back to my apartment, leaving the sleek sedans and the catering vans behind, my mind wasn't on grief anymore. It was on survival. The image of Cameron's greedy, sweaty face as he handed me that representation agreement burned in my mind. "We'll manage it for you." I knew what that meant. They would drain the estate dry, hiding fees and management costs, until there was nothing left but a hollow shell, just like they had done with their own finances. But I needed proof. Suspicion wasn't enough to stop them in probate court. The next morning, I drove to Mr. Henderson's office. It was located in a brownstone downtown, a building as old and sturdy as the man himself. "They filed an emergency motion this morning," Mr. Henderson said the moment I sat down. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He pushed a file across his mahogany desk. "They are petitioning to be named temporary special administrators of the estate, claiming that the assets are volatile and need immediate oversight." "Volatile?" I asked, flipping through the legal jargon. "Grandpa's money is in municipal bonds and real estate. It's the least volatile portfolio in existence." "They claim the real estate requires immediate maintenance and that the art collection is at risk of theft," Henderson explained, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "If the judge grants this, they get the keys to the kingdom before the will is even read. They can enter the properties, secure items, and access the accounts to pay for necessary expenses." "They're going to loot the house," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "They're going to sell the art and the antiques and claim they were stolen or lost to cover their own debts." Henderson looked at me over his spectacles. "Do you know that for a fact, Aaron, that they have debts?" "I know them," I said. "Cameron leases his cars. Diane borrows jewelry for events. They live on a razor's edge, but I need proof." I stared at the bookshelf behind Henderson, my mind racing. I thought about the house, the sprawling Victorian estate where I had spent my childhood summers before everything went wrong. I thought about the library. And then it clicked. "The desk," I whispered. "Excuse me." "When I was 16, I told Henderson, my voice gaining speed, just before the end. Grandpa asked me to restore his partner's desk. It's an 1890s roll top. Massive thing, oak and mahogany. He wanted a secure place to keep his private journals. Not a safe, he said safes were for money, but desks were for thoughts. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of Henderson's desk. I built a false bottom in the central drawer. It's a mechanism triggered by a magnetic latch hidden in the decorative molding. You can't find it unless you know exactly where to press. Henderson's eyebrows shot up. And you think there's something in there? Grandpa told me once at the diner that he kept a ledger of sins, I said. He was joking, I thought, but if he knew they were coming for his money, he would have kept the receipts. If they get temporary administration rights, they'll sell that desk or burn the papers inside without even knowing they exist. Henderson glanced at the clock on the wall. The hearing for their emergency motion is in 48 hours. If that ledger contains evidence of financial coercion or debt that conflicts with their ability to be trustees, we can stop them. But we need the physical book. I can't just walk in there, I said. They changed the codes on the gate yesterday. I saw the security truck leaving. Henderson opened his drawer and pulled out a heavy brass key ring. The electronic gate is new. The service entrance around the back, near the old stables, that still uses a deadlock. Henry never trusted digital locks entirely. He left a set of physical keys in my care. He slid the keys across the polished wood. They clinked softly. I cannot advise you to enter the property, Aaron, he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. That would be trespassing. However, if you were to, check on the condition of the furniture to ensure it hasn't been damaged by the humidity. That would be a reasonable concern for a potential heir. I picked up the keys. The metal was cold in my palm. I'll be careful, I said. Be fast, Henderson corrected. If they find you, they won't just call the police. They'll use it to prove you're unstable and unfit to inherit. I waited until nightfall. The estate was located on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by dense woods that swallowed the sound of the wind. I parked my truck a mile down the road, hidden behind a cluster of pines, and walked the rest of the way. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wasn't a thief. I was a carpenter. I fixed things. But tonight, I had to break in to fix the biggest injustice of my life. The service entrance was overgrown with ivy. I used the flashlight on my phone, shielding the beam with my hand. The key Henderson gave me was stiff, fighting the lock that hadn't been turned in years. I held my breath, wiggling it gently, feeling the tumblers through the brass. Click. The door groaned inward. The smell hit me instantly, dust, old wax, and the faint, lingering scent of Henry's pipe tobacco. It smelled like home. It smelled like loss. I moved through the house in silence, the floorboards creaking under my boots. I knew every squeak in this house. I knew to step over the third plank in the hallway and to stay to the left on the stairs. The library was on the ground floor. I slipped inside and closed the heavy oak door behind me. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the massive roll-top desk that dominated the room. I approached it with reverence. I ran my hand over the wood. I remembered sanding this curve. I remembered staining this trim. It was my work preserving his legacy. I knelt down, my fingers tracing the decorative molding on the right side of the drawer casing. I found the hidden knot in the wood pattern. I pressed my thumb against it hard, while simultaneously pulling the drawer handle up and out. A click thunk. The false bottom dropped open. There it was, a leather-bound notebook worn at the edges, the red ledger. My hands trembled as I reached for it. I opened it to the last entry, dated only 3 weeks ago. Cameron called again, demanded $50,000 for investment opportunities. I know it's for the gambling debt in Vegas. I told him no. He threatened to cut off my access to the great-grandkids. I recorded the call. I flipped back a few pages. Diane asked for her advance on the inheritance. Again, she claims the charity gala needs a platinum sponsor. I called the charity. They have no record of her pledge. She's funneling the money to pay off the second mortgage they took out secretly. Tears pricked my eyes. They had been bleeding him dry. They had been tormenting an old man in his final years, treating him like an ATM. Well, well, well. The voice cut through the silence like a whip. The overhead chandelier blazed to life, blinding me. I spun around, clutching the ledger to my chest. Cameron was standing in the doorway, wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of scotch. Diane was behind him, clutching a tablet, looking like a statue carved from ice. They were staying in the house. Of course they were. They hadn't wasted a second moving in. I knew it, Diane hissed, stepping into the room. I told you I heard something. The little rat is scurrying around in the dark. What do you have there, Aaron? Cameron asked, his voice slurred but dangerous. He took a step toward me. Stealing silver, looking for cash. I'm not stealing, I said, my voice shaking but loud. I'm retrieving my property. Your property? Cameron laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Everything in this house belongs to the estate, which means it belongs to us. You're trespassing. I should call the cops right now and have you thrown in a cell. Go ahead, I challenged him, holding up the ledger. Call them, and when they get here, I'll show them this. Cameron squinted at the book. What is that? It's Grandpa's ledger, I said. The one where he recorded every single dime you begged for, every lie you told him, every threat you made. The color drained from Diane's face. She recognized the book. Give me that, Cameron snarled, abandoning his relaxed posture. He lunged for me. I stepped back, putting the heavy desk between us. It documents the gambling debts, Cameron. The second mortgage, Diane, it proves you have a conflict of interest. You can't be administrators of an estate you owe money to. You lying little. Cameron slammed his hand on the desk. He was senile. He didn't know what he was writing. That book is the ramblings of a sick old man. Is the recording senile too? I bluffed, referencing the entry I had just read. He says he recorded the calls. That stopped them cold. The silence in the room was heavy, electric with tension. You're pathetic, Diane spat, though she didn't move closer. You think a diary is G. Owing to stop us, we are his children, you are nobody. You're a failed carpenter living in a garage. I may be a carpenter, I said, gripping the ledger so hard my knuckles turned white. But at least I didn't have to wait for him to die to pay my bills. Cameron's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. Get out before I physically throw you out. I'm leaving, I said, moving toward the window, keeping my eyes on them. But this book is coming with me, and tomorrow morning, Mr. Henderson is going to file it with the court. If you walk out that door with that book, Cameron threatened, his voice low, we will ruin you. We will bury you in legal fees so deep you won't see the sun for a decade. We will take your little shop, your truck, everything. You can try, I said. I opened the French doors to the garden, the cool night air rushing in. But you forgot one thing. What? Diane snapped. I have nothing to lose, I said. You have everything. I slipped out into the night, the ledger tucked under my arm, running through the darkness as the lights of the house blazed behind me like an angry eye. The next 48 hours were a siege. I didn't go back to my apartment. I knew they would send someone there. Instead, I stayed at the workshop, sleeping on a cot in the back room, the smell of sawdust providing a strange comfort. The door was bolted, and I had wedged a table saw against it for good measure. My phone was useless. It rang incessantly. Voicemails from Cameron, alternating between threats and bribery. Aaron, be reasonable. We can offer you a settlement, $20,000 cash, just bring the book back. Then, an hour later, you're going to jail, you thief. I sat at my workbench under the harsh fluorescent lights, carefully photographing every page of the ledger with my phone, uploading the images to a cloud drive Mr. Henderson had set up. When I finally met Henderson at the courthouse the morning of the emergency hearing, he looked grim but determined. Did you get it? He asked. I handed him the ledger. He opened it, scanning the pages, his expression tightening with every line he read. This is, he paused, adjusting his glasses. This is worse than I thought. He documented everything. dates, times, amounts. He even noted the serial numbers of the bonds Diane forced him to liquidate last year. "Is it enough?" I asked. "To stop the emergency motion?" "Yes," Henderson said. "The judge won't grant them control with this kind of evidence floating around. But Aaron, this is just the skirmish. The war is the will reading tomorrow." He led me into a side room of the courthouse. "They know they can't suppress the will forever," Henderson explained. "But now they are desperate. They know that if the will leaves the bulk of the estate to them, as they assume it does, they can simply pay off these debts and bury the evidence. But if the will doesn't leave it to them, they go to prison," I finished. "Fraud, elder abuse." "Exactly," Henderson said, "which means they are going to try to break you before tomorrow." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from social media, then another, then 10 more. I opened the app. A local news outlet had posted a story. "Granddaughter of local magnate investigated for theft and harassment." There was a photo of me, an unflattering one taken from a distance, likely by a private investigator, looking disheveled. The article cited family sources claiming that I had broken into the estate and stolen sensitive medical documents to blackmail the grieving family. "They're destroying my reputation," I said, showing the screen to Henderson. "My clients will see this." "It's a distraction," Henderson said firmly. "Do not engage, do not comment. They want you to lash out so they can paint you as unstable." We walked into the hearing room. Cameron and Diane were there with their shark-like lawyers. When they saw me, the hatred in their eyes was palpable. They didn't look like parents. They looked like cornered animals. The hearing was short. Mr. Henderson presented the ledger not as stolen property, but as evidence preserved by a concerned beneficiary. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for theatrics, read 3 pages of the ledger. She looked at Cameron, then at Diane. "Motion for temporary special administration denied," the judge ruled, slamming her gavel. "The court will appoint an independent third-party administrator pending the reading of the will." Cameron slammed his fist on the table. "This is outrageous. That girl is a thief." "Mr. Dad," the judge warned, "one more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. The will reading proceeds tomorrow as scheduled." We won the battle, but the victory felt fragile. As we left the courthouse, Cameron cornered us in the hallway. He was no longer trying to look polished. His tie was crooked, his eyes bloodshot. "You think you're clever," he spat, ignoring High's lawyer's attempt to pull him away. "You think because you found a diary you've won? You have no idea what's in that will." The old man was traditional. He believed in bloodlines. He might have hated us, but he would never leave his empire to a girl who plays with sandpaper. "We'll see," I said, my voice calm. "I'm offering you one last chance," Cameron hissed. "Walk away, denounce the ledger. We'll give you 50,000. That's more money than you'll ever see in your pathetic life. If you go into that room tomorrow, you get nothing. We will contest every penny. We will tie you up in court for 20 years. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the fear behind the bluster. I saw the sweat on his brow. "I don't want your money, Cameron," I said, "and I don't want a settlement." "Then what do you want?" he screamed. "I want you to hear what he had to say," I replied. I turned and walked away, the sound of his cursing echoing off the marble walls. I was terrified, yes. They had resources I couldn't dream of, but I had the one thing they lacked. I had the truth. And tomorrow, in Mr. Henderson's conference room, the truth was finally going to come out. The poison pill was waiting. The conference room at Henderson, Miller and Associates was designed to intimidate. It was a cavernous space dominated by a long, polished mahogany table that reflected the somber faces of everyone seated around it. The air conditioning was set too low, creating a chill that settled deep in my bones, though I suspected the shivering of the people across from me had nothing to do with the temperature. It was 10:00 a.m., the reading of the last will and testament of Henry Arthur Blackwood. I sat on one side of the table, alone, my hands resting on my lap to hide their trembling. Across from me sat Cameron and Diane, flanked by their two lawyers. They looked like they were preparing for a merger, not a family memorial. Cameron was tapping a gold pen against the table, a rhythmic click-click-click that echoed in the silence. Diane was scrolling through her phone, though her eyes were darting nervously toward the door every few seconds. Mr. Henderson entered precisely at 10:01 a.m. He carried a thick leather binder and a small remote control. He didn't look at my parents. He walked to the head of the table, sat down, and placed the binder in front of him. "Good morning," Henderson said, his voice dry and devoid of warmth. "We are here to execute the final wishes of Henry Blackwood. As per his instructions, this reading is being recorded." He nodded to a camera set up on a tripod in the corner. Cameron scoffed audibly. "Let's get on with it, Henderson," Cameron said, leaning back in his chair. "We all know how this goes. Just tell us the trust structure so we can get back to the city." "Patience, Mr. Blackwood," Henderson said, opening the binder. Henry was quite specific about the order of proceedings. Henderson began to read. The first 20 minutes were standard legal boilerplate, revocation of prior wills, payment of debts, and funeral expenses. Then came the minor bequests. "To my longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, I leave the sum of $100,000 in gratitude for her loyalty," Henderson read. Diane rolled her eyes. "Ridiculous," she muttered to her lawyer. "That woman stole silverware." "To the St. Jude's Children's Hospital, I leave the sum of $250,000, Henderson continued. Cameron checked his watch. "Fine, fine, charity tax write-off, good move, get to the residue of the estate." "Article IV," Henderson announced, his voice taking on a harder edge. "The distribution of the primary estate, including the Blackwood Manor, the investment portfolio, and all personal effects." The room went deathly silent. Cameron stopped clicking his pen. Diane put her phone down. This was it, the moment they had been salivating for. "I, Henry Arthur Blackwood," Henderson read, "being of sound mind, do hereby address my children, Cameron and Diane." Cameron smirked, shooting a glance at me. "Here we go. Don't worry, Aaron. We'll make sure you get a nice little allowance." Henderson ignored him and continued reading. "I have spent the last decade watching you. I have watched you live in houses you could not afford, drive cars you did not own, and trample on people you viewed as beneath you. But mostly, I have watched how you treated your daughter, Erin." The smirk vanished from Cameron's face. Diane stiffened. "You abandoned her at 18 because she refused to be a pawn in your social games," Henderson read, his voice rising slightly. "You cut her off. You left her to struggle while you begged me for money to cover your gambling debts and your failed ventures." "This is outrageous," Cameron shouted, standing up. "I'm not listening to this libel." "Sit down," Henderson barked. It was the first time I had ever heard him raise his voice. It cracked like a whip. "I am not Phi." "Nisht, and if you leave this room, you forfeit your right to contest what comes next." Cameron slowly sank back into his chair, his face turning a mottled purple. "Therefore," Henderson continued, reading from the page, "to my son Cameron and my daughter Diane I leave absolutely nothing." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. "What?" Diane whispered, her voice barely audible. "I leave you nothing," Henderson repeated. "Not a dime, not a single share of stock, not a piece of furniture." "You can't do that," Cameron screamed, slamming his fist on the table. "I am his son. There are laws. We'll contest this. We'll sue the estate into the ground. We'll claim undue influence. We'll claim he was incompetent." "I anticipated that," Henderson said calmly. He turned the page. "Which brings us to Article V, the in terrorem clause, colloquially known as the poison pill." Cameron froze. "The what?" "Henry included a specific provision," Henderson explained, looking over his glasses. "He anticipated that you would try to contest the will. He anticipated you would try to drag Erin through years of litigation. So, he added a condition." Henderson picked up a separate document from the binder. a copy of the ledger I had retrieved from the desk. "This is the Blackwood ledger," Henderson said. "As you know, it documents acts of embezzlement, tax fraud, and the forging of Henry's signature on loan documents by both of you over the last 5 years." Diane let out a small, strangled sound. "The clause states," Henderson read, "that if Cameron or Diane, or any agent acting on their behalf, contests the validity of this will, the executor is instructed to immediately turn over the original ledger and all accompanying audio recordings to the district attorney's office and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division." The blood drained from Cameron's face so completely he looked like a corpse. "However," Henderson continued, "if you accept the terms of this will without contest, the ledger will remain sealed in the estate archives, unless a criminal investigation is opened independently." Henderson closed the binder. "So you have a choice," he said, folding his hands. "You can sue for the money and go to prison for fraud, or you can walk away with nothing but keep your freedom. Those are your only options." "This is blackmail," Cameron hissed, but there was no power in his voice anymore. He looked small. He looked defeated. "No," I spoke up for the first time. Everyone turned to look at me. "It's justice. You wanted to manage the estate. You wanted to control the narrative. Well, Grandpa just controlled it for you." Diane was trembling violently. She grabbed Cameron's arm. "Cameron, we can't. The tax returns, the loans." Cameron shook her off, but he didn't argue. He knew. He knew that Henry had them checkmated from the grave. "And the estate?" Cameron asked, his voice a raspy whisper. "Who gets it?" "Article VI," Henderson said softly. "The entire residue of the estate, valued at approximately $3.5 million, along with the Blackwood Manor and all personal property, is bequeathed to my granddaughter, Erin Blackwood, to help her build something that lasts." Cameron looked at me. For a moment, I thought he was going to lunge across the table, but the fight had gone out of him. He looked at the ledger sitting on Henderson's desk, the book that contained all his secrets, and then he looked at the door. "Come on, Diane," he muttered, standing up unsteadily. "But," Diane started to sob, "the house, my clothes are there." "Get out," Cameron snapped at her, dragging her up by her arm. "It's over." They didn't look back. They didn't say goodbye. They just shuffled out of the room, their high-priced lawyers trailing behind them like confused puppies. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing the silence. I sat there, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. I looked at the empty chairs where my parents had sat. I waited for the elation, the triumphant rush of victory. But it didn't come. Instead, I just felt a profound, heavy relief. It was the feeling of setting down a burden you've been carrying for 10 years. "Are you all right, Erin?" Mr. Henderson asked gently. I looked at him, and for the first time in days, I smiled. A real smile. "I think," I said, "I'm ready to go back to work." The fallout was swift and brutal, just as Henry had intended. Cameron and Diane didn't contest the will. They couldn't. They slunk back to the city, terrified that even a whisper of rebellion would send the ledger to the authorities. But secrets like theirs have a way of surfacing. 2 months after the funeral, the news broke. It wasn't the estate that took them down, it was their own desperation. Without the influx of Henry's money they had been banking on, their house of cards collapsed. The bank foreclosed on their mansion. The luxury cars were repossessed. And, in a twist of irony that I think Henry would have appreciated, the charity Diane had been pretending to sponsor launched an audit that exposed her previous, administrative, skimming. They weren't in prison, yet, but they were social pariahs. They were bankrupt, humiliated, and exiled from the high society they worshipped. I heard through the grapevine that Cameron was working as a consultant for a shady timeshare company, and Diane was living in a small condo paid for by a distant cousin. They never called me, I never called them. As for me, my life changed, but not in the way people expected. I didn't buy a sports car, I didn't go on a world tour. I paid off the debts on my workshop. I bought the building next door and expanded. I hired 3 apprentices, kids who, like me, didn't fit into the college mold but had magic in their hands. And then there was the house. I moved into Blackwood Manor. It was too big for one person, really, but I didn't live in it as a museum. I turned the entire East Wing into a community restoration center. I started a nonprofit, funded by the estate, teaching traditional carpentry and restoration skills to at-risk youth. One afternoon, 6 months after the reading, I was in the library, Henry's library. The roll-top desk was there, gleaming in the afternoon sun. I had fixed the mechanism, sanded down the scratches, and oiled the wood until it glowed. I sat in his chair. It still creaked when I leaned back. Mr. Henderson had come by earlier that morning to drop off the final paperwork. The estate was settled. The money was mine. The future was mine. I opened the center drawer, the one with the false bottom. It was empty now. The ledger was in a bank vault, a permanent insurance policy against my parents ever returning. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo, the one of Henry and me fishing. I placed it on the desk, right next to a new photo, me and my 3 apprentices, covered in sawdust, standing in front of a restored 18th century armoire we had just finished. "I did it, Grandpa," I whispered to the empty room. "I'm building something that lasts." I looked out the window at the overgrown garden I was slowly bringing back to life. I realized that my parents had been wrong about everything. They thought wealth was about what you could buy, what you could show off, what you could consume. Henry knew the truth. Wealth was about the freedom to protect the things that matter. It was about the ability to say no to the people who want to control you. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a client asking about a dining table that had been in their family for 4 generations. They wanted to know if it could be saved. I picked up the phone, my hand rough with calluses, my heart full. "Yes," I said, "everything can be saved. You just have to be willing to put in the work." I hung up, grabbed my tool belt, and walked out of the library. There was work to do, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't doing it to survive. I was doing it because it was who I was. And nobody could ever take that away from me again.